They slaughtered my trees. My scream tore through the crisp morning air, echoing across the sprawling hills of my 200-year-old Texas ranch. I stood frozen, my boots sinking into the dew-soaked grass, staring at a scene that ripped my heart in two. Where ancient oaks once stretched their gnarled branches toward the sky, only jagged stumps remained, hundreds of them, scattered like gravestones across my family's sacred grove. The air smelled of fresh-cut wood and betrayal. These weren't just trees. They were the soul of this land, witnesses 2 centuries of history. From my great-great-grandfather's first plow to my childhood summers, climbing their sturdy limbs. Now they were gone, reduced to sawdust by the greedy hands of the Crestview Estates Homeowners Association. Asterisk, I'd been away for a weekend. Visiting my sister Ellie in Austin. Was supposed to be a quick trip catch-up over barbecue, maybe. Hit a honky-tonk. But Saturday night, my phone buzzed with a call from Old Man Jenkins, my neighbor since I was a kid. His voice was frantic, cracked with urgency. Caleb, you better get home now. Some HOA suits are on your land with chainsaws. Tearing through your grove like it's nothing. My stomach dropped. I didn't even say goodbye to Ellie. Just grabbed my keys and floored my old Ford F-150 back to the ranch. A 3-hour drive that felt like eternity. Asterisk the whole way. My mind raced. Those oaks weren't just trees, they were family. My great-grandfather used to tell stories about how his father planted some of those trees after surviving the Civil War. Each one a promise to rebuild, to endure. They'd shaded our family picnics, weathered hurricanes, and stood tall through droughts that turned the plains to dust. I'd spent countless evenings under their canopy, strumming my guitar, dreaming up a future where my own kids would swing from their branches. The thought of them gone made my chest tighten, like someone was squeezing the air out of me. Asterisk, when I pulled up to the ranch at dawn, the sight hit me like a punch. The grove, once a cathedral of green, was a wasteland. Chainsaw marks scarred. The earth and tire tracks from heavy machinery crisscrossed my property. A crew in neon vests was still there, packing up their equipment, laughing like they hadn't just destroyed a piece of history. My hands shook as I climbed out of the truck. What the hell have you done? I roared, storming toward them. One guy, a burly foreman with a clipboard, shrugged. Orders from Crestview HOA, pal. Your trees were blocking the view for the new development. Asterisk the view? My family's 200-year-old ranch, a sprawling 300 acres of rolling hills and history, was here long before their cookie-cutter mansion sprouted up. I'd opted out of their HOA years ago when they first tried to annex the land around me. My property was grandfathered, free from their petty rules about lawn heights and mailbox colors. But that didn't stop them. Nailed to my gate was a letter typed on crisp HOA letterhead. Notice of non-compliance. Tree obstruction of aesthetic standards. Aesthetic standards? These trees were older than their entire organization. Some pushing 250 years, their roots deep enough to tap the heart of Texas itself. Asterisk, I ripped the letter down, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't just about trees. This was personal. The HOA, led by their president, Karen Whitaker, had been after my land for months. They'd sent letters demanding I trim the grove, claiming it lowered property values for their planned phase to expand fancy cul-de-sac of identical houses that would creep right up to my fence line. I'd ignored every letter, tossing them into a drawer with a laugh. My ranch wasn't part of their jurisdiction, and I'd be damned if I let them dictate what I did with my family's legacy. But this was war. They'd trespassed, destroyed my property, and spit on my heritage. I didn't know it then, but this was just the start of a battle that would land me in handcuffs and turn my quiet ranch into a viral sensation. The Crestview Estates Homeowners Association. It's been a dark cloud over my ranch ever since they planted their gated community 5 years ago, just beyond my southern fence line. Their cookie-cutter McMansions, with perfectly trimmed hedges and identical beige exteriors, were an insult to the wild, weathered beauty of my 300-acre homestead. My ranch, with its creaky barns, wildflower fields, and that ancient oak grove, is a living testament to my family's 200-year legacy in Texas. It had survived floods, wars, and the Great Depression. But now it faced a new kind of enemy, a power-hungry HOA led by Karen Whitaker, a woman who treated her clipboard like a gavel and her rulebook like scripture. From the moment Crestview broke ground, they'd been after me to join their ranks. They sent glossy brochures promising community benefits, a shared pool, security patrols, and uniform aesthetic standards that would supposedly elevate property values. I laughed them off. My family didn't need their chlorinated pools or nosy guards to thrive. We'd been self-sufficient since my great-grandfather drove his first fence post into this land. My property was grandfathered out of their jurisdiction, a fact I reminded them of every time they sent another letter. But Karen Whitaker didn't take kindly to being ignored. She was the kind of person who thrived on control, and my refusal to bow was a personal affront. It started with small annoyances. Letters arrived monthly, citing violations like my barn's peeling paint or my fence's rustic appearance. Then they got bolder, demanding I trim my oak grove because it obstructed the scenic vista for their residents. Scenic vista. Those oaks were the vista, their twisted branches framing sunsets that drew photographers and nature lovers from across the county. Some were over 250 years old, their roots anchoring stories of my ancestors' survival tales of drought, love, and resilience whispered to me by my grandpa under their shade. I ignored every letter, tossing them into a drawer with a chuckle. My ranch wasn't part of their HOA, and I'd be damned if I let them dictate what I did with my family's legacy. But Karen wasn't just persistent, she was ruthless. Last spring, she'd shown up at my gate unannounced, her heels sinking into the dirt, her perfume clashing with the scent of my wildflowers. "Mr. Dawson," she'd said, peering over her glasses, "your grove is lowering property values for our entire community. Trim it, or we'll take action." I'd leaned against my fence, arms crossed, and told her to take her rules and shove them. My land was mine, free and clear, and those trees weren't going anywhere. She stormed off, her face redder than a summer sunset, but I didn't think much of it. I should have known better. Karen wasn't the type to let a no stand. When I found the stumps that morning, it all clicked. This wasn't about aesthetics or property values, it was a land grab. Later that day, I found a folder one of the crew had left behind, stuffed with documents that made my blood run cold. There was a map of my ranch, my grove marked in red ink as obstruction zone. Beyond it, their Phase 2 expansion was sketched out. A cul-de-sac of new homes that would creep right up to my fence line, swallowing my southern pasture. They'd hired a crew, trespassed onto my property, and turned my oaks into firewood to clear the way for their suburban sprawl. The letter nailed to my gate was just a cover story, a flimsy excuse to justify their felony. I drove to the Crestview Estates office, the crumpled letter in my fist, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and disbelief. The office was a sterile box of glass and chrome, a far cry from the weathered charm of my ranch house. Karen sat behind her desk, her hair pulled into a tight bun. Her lips curled into a smirk that said she thought she'd already won. "Mr. Dawson," she said, barely looking up from her laptop, "your trees were a safety hazard. Overgrown, unstable, a risk to our community. You're lucky we didn't fine you for negligence. Safety hazard." I slammed the letter on her desk, my voice shaking. "You trespassed on my land, Karen. You destroyed my family's history. This isn't over." She leaned back unfazed, her eyes glinting with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences. "We acted within our rights," she said, sliding a glossy HOA rulebook toward me. "Page 47, Section B, non-compliant properties can be addressed for the greater good of the community." I wanted to rip that rulebook to shreds. My ranch wasn't part of her community, and she knew it. But then I saw at a corner of that same map peeking out from a stack of papers on her desk, my grove circled in red. They'd planned this, banking on me being too stunned to fight back. I left the office, my hands clenched, vowing to make them pay. Little did I know, the fight was about to take a turn I never saw coming. My hands were still trembling as I dialed Sheriff Ramirez, a grizzled lawman I'd known since we were kids, sneaking beers behind the high school bleachers. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows over the stumps that marked the graveyard of my family's grove. I paced the dirt, my boots kicking up clouds of dust as I explained the carnage over the phone. "Caleb, stay put," Ramirez said, his voice calm but edged with the kind of steel that meant business. "I'm coming. Out there now." I hung up, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and hope. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was Chief Ramirez. He'd grown up in this county, knew its history, and had a reputation for cutting through bureaucratic nonsense like a hot knife through butter. 20 minutes later, his patrol truck rumbled down my gravel drive, kicking up pebbles that pinged against the undercarriage. Ramirez stepped out, his badge glinting in the morning light. His weathered Stetson tilted slightly as he surveyed the devastation. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a face etched by years of dealing with everything from bar fights to land disputes. "Caleb," he said, his voice low as he stepped over a fallen branch, "what in God's name happened here?" I gestured to the stumps, my voice cracking. "The HOA chief. Crestview Estates. They came onto my land, tore down my oaks, and left me this." I handed him the crumpled letter from the gate, its smug non-compliance heading practically, "Mocking me, asterisk." Ramirez read it, his jaw tightening. He didn't say anything at first, just walked the grove, his boots crunching on sawdust and twigs. He knelt beside one of the larger stumps, running his hand over the raw, sappy wood, counting the rings like he was reading a history book. "Some of these are over 200 years old," he muttered, almost to himself. Then he stood, his eyes narrowing. As he looked at me, "Caleb, this ain't just your land they messed with. This grove's protected." My jaw dropped. Protected? I'd heard my grandpa mention something about the grove being special, but I'd always thought it was just family pride talking. "What do you mean, protected?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Asterisk Ramirez motioned me over to his truck, where he pulled a worn, leather-bound ledger from the passenger seat. The thing looked like it belonged in a museum, its pages yellowed and edges curling. He flipped it open, running his finger down a list of entries, until he stopped at one dated 1975. "Here," he said, tapping the page. "Your great-grandfather, Amos Dawson, worked with the county to register this grove as a Texas heritage site. It's not just a bunch of trees. It's a historical and ecological landmark, home to rare native oaks, nesting grounds for protected birds, even tied to the county's founding when settlers used this spot as a meeting point. Cutting these down without state approval? That's a felony, Caleb. A big one." Asterisk I stared at. The ledger, my mind reeling. There it was, in faded ink. Dawson Grove, 300 acres, designated for preservation due to historical significance and unique ecosystem. My great-grandfather's signature was scrawled at the bottom, bold and proud. I'd spent my whole life on this ranch, but I'd never known the full weight of what it meant. Those oaks weren't just my family's legacy, they were Texas's legacy. The HOA hadn't just trespassed, it committed a crime against history itself. I felt a surge of pride, but it was quickly swallowed by fury. Karen Whitaker and her crew thought they could waltz onto my land and erase centuries with a few chainsaws. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Asterisk Ramirez closed the ledger and grabbed his radio, his voice sharp as he called for backup. "Unit 12, Unit 17. Get out to the Dawson Ranch, ASAP. We've got a crime scene protected heritage site. Unauthorized destruction." He turned to me, his eyes steady. "Caleb, this grove's a crime scene now. Nobody touches it until we get this sorted. And those HOA folks, they're in deep." He started marking off the area with yellow tape from his truck, looping it around. The remaining trees and stumps like a barrier against further violation. I watched my chest tight as the reality sank in. This wasn't just about my trees anymore. It was about justice. It's about holding people accountable who thought rules didn't apply to them. Asterisk, as Ramirez worked. I thought about my great-grandfather, Amos. He'd been a tough old man, the kind who'd wrestle a steer and then read poetry by lantern light. He'd told me stories about the grove, how it had been a gathering place for settlers, a refuge during storms, even a hideout for outlaws. In the old days, I'd always thought they were just tales to make a kid's eyes go wide, but now I saw them differently. Every ring in those stumps held a story, and the HOA had tried to erase them all. I clenched my fists, picturing Karen's smug face. She'd called my oaks a safety hazard. I'd show her what a real hazard looked like when I dragged her to court. Ramirez finished taping off the grove and clapped a hand on my shoulder. We'll get him, Caleb, but you gotta stay cool. The law handle this. I nodded, but inside, I was a storm of emotions, grief for my trees, pride for my family's history, and a burning need to make Crestview pay. Little did I know the fight was about to spill into the open. With cameras, crowds, and a pair of handcuffs I never saw coming. By noon, my ranch had transformed into a chaotic circus, a whirlwind of dust, voices, and flashing cameras that seemed to erupt from nowhere. Word of the HOA's destruction had spread like wildfire through our small Texas county, and it brought out everyone nosy neighbors, local reporters with microphones, and even a group of environmental activists from Austin who'd caught wind of the story on X My Quiet Grove. Now a crime scene cordoned off with Sheriff Ramirez's yellow tape was buzzing with energy, a strange mix of outrage and curiosity. I stood by the largest stump, my arms crossed, trying to process the morning's events while fielding questions from folks I hadn't seen in years. "Caleb, you gonna sue?" one neighbor shouted. "Damn right," I muttered, my eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for the next shoe to drop. That shoe dropped when Karen Whitaker's sleek black SUV rolled up, kicking up gravel as it screeched to a halt just outside my gate. She stepped out, her heels wobbling on the uneven ground, her face a storm cloud of indignation. Behind her trailed a man in a cheap suit, her lawyer. I figured in two of the neon-vested crew members who'd been part of the tree cutting. "Crew!" The crowd parted as she marched toward the grove, her clipboard clutched like a shield. "Sheriff Ramirez," she barked, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "This is HOA jurisdiction. You have no right to interfere with our community's interests." I couldn't help it, I laughed, loud and bitter, right in her face. "Your jurisdiction ends at my fence line, Karen. You trespassed, you destroyed my grove, and now you're going to answer for it." The crowd roared, a mix of cheers and gasps, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. For the first time since I'd seen the stumps, I felt like I had the upper hand, but Karen wasn't backing down. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing to slits. "Mr. Dawson, you've been a problem for Crestview Estates since day one. Refusing to comply, ignoring our letters, this is on you. You acted to protect our residents' property values." Her lawyer nodded, chiming in with a rehearsed spiel about eminent domain and community standards. I was about to lose it, my fists clenching as I stepped toward her, pointing at the stumps. "Protect? You call this protection? You destroyed my family's legacy, Karen? Those trees were here before your HOA even existed." The tension was electric. The crowd hanging on every word. Porters scribbled notes, their cameras clicking like vultures circling a carcass. That's when things took a wild turn. A young deputy new to the force and clearly overwhelmed by the chaos misread my raised voice and pointed finger as a threat. Before I could blink, he was on me, grabbing my arm and yanking it behind my back. Cold steel snapped around my wrists, and the crowd gasped as he barked, "Calm down, sir, or you're under arrest." I froze, stunned. Arrested me? The guy whose land was just vandalized? Old man Jenkins, leaning on his cane, hollered from the sidelines, "You got the wrong? Man, you fool. Caleb's the victim here." The environmental activists started chanting, "Free Caleb, free Caleb." And I could see the headlines forming already. Sheriff Ramirez, who'd been talking to a deputy near the tape, spun around, his face a mix of exasperation and amusement. "Rookie, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, striding over. He grabbed the deputy's shoulder and pulled him back, unlocking the cuffs with a quick flick of his key. "Sorry, Caleb," he muttered, shooting the deputy a glare that could have melted steel. "Kids new, got a little overzealous." I rubbed my wrists, my pride stinging more than my skin, but I nodded. The crowd cheered again, and I caught Jenkins giving me a thumbs up, his grin wide enough to show his missing tooth. But the real bombshell was yet to come. One of the environmental activists, A wiry guy named Tara with a ponytail and a drone controller pushed through the crowd, holding up her phone. "Sheriff, Caleb, you need to see this," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Been flying her drone over my ranch that morning, part of a project to document native ecosystems. She'd caught the HOA's crew in the ACL shows roaring, oaks crashing, and Karen herself directing the operation from the sidelines. The footage was crystal clear, time-stamped, and undeniable. The crowd went silent as she played it on her phone, the sound of buzzing saws mixing with Karen's voice barking orders. "Hurry up! We need this cleared before Dawson gets back." Ramirez's face hardened as he watched. He turned to Karen, who'd gone pale, her clipboard suddenly limp in her hands. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, pulling a warrant from his pocket. "You're under arrest for the illegal destruction of a protected Texas heritage site." The crowd erupted, cameras flashing as a deputy cuffed Karen, her lawyer stammering objections that nobody listened to. She shot me a venomous look as they led her to the patrol car, but I just stared back, my heart pounding with a mix of vindication and disbelief. This wasn't just about my trees anymore. It was about justice, and it was about to go viral. The dust had barely settled from the chaos of that morning, but my quiet Texas ranch was no longer just a patch of family land. It had become a battleground for justice. A symbol of resistance against overreach, and, thanks to the internet, a viral sensation. By the next day, the story of the HOA's destruction of my protected grove had exploded across X, with hashtag #SaveCaleb'sGrove trending nationwide. My phone buzzed non-stop with notifications, supportive messages, angry rants about HOAs, and even tips from strangers about Crestview Estates' shady history. My modest YouTube channel, where I'd mostly posted videos of ranch life, fixing fences or strumming my guitar under the oaks, became a rallying point overnight. Viewers flooded the comments, calling me a hero, a victim, or just that guy who stood up to the HOA. I was still reeling from the loss of my trees, but the outpouring of support lit a fire in me. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. I sat on my porch that evening, the stump-filled grove glowing under the sunset, and scrolled through X posts on my phone. People were sharing their own HOA horror stories, fines for unapproved mailboxes, threats over unmowed lawns. Even one guy who claimed his HOA tried to seize his dog for excessive barking. But what caught my eye were the posts digging into Crestview's past. A user from a nearby town shared a thread about how the HOA had bullied an elderly couple into selling their farm for pennies, only for Crestview to flip it for a luxury development. Another posted a leaked email from Karen Whitaker to a developer, hinting at acquiring adjacent properties to expand their empire. My grove wasn't just a random target, it was a stepping stone in their plan to swallow up every independent acre in the county. I screenshotted everything, my resolve hardening. Karen and her cronies weren't just going to pay for my trees. They were going to answer for years of strong-arming good people. The next morning, I got a call from Tara, the environmental activist with the drone footage. She wasn't just a random tree hugger, she was part of Texas Green Guardians, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving native ecosystems. "Caleb," she said, her voice crackling with excitement, "we've got a lawyer who specializes in heritage site cases. She wants to meet you. This could be huge." By noon, I was sitting in a cramped Austin coffee shop with Tara and her lawyer, Maria Delgado, a sharp-eyed woman with a handshake like a vice. Maria laid it out plain. The HOA's destruction of a protected Texas heritage site wasn't just a civil matter, it was a criminal one. "We're filing a lawsuit," she said, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "It's damages for the trees, emotional distress, and punitive action to make sure Crestview never pulls this again. Plus, we're pushing for a state investigation into their practices." I signed on the spot, my pen shaking with a mix of nerves and anticipation. This was my chance to hit back. The lawsuit wasn't just about money, it was about accountability. Maria's team dug into Crestview's records, uncovering a pattern of aggressive land grabs and questionable permits. The county got involved, slapping Crestview with a hefty fine for violating heritage site laws. The state put their phase 2 expansion on hold, pending a full environmental review. Karen Whitaker was suspended from her HOA presidency. Her name splashed across local news as the architect of the grove's destruction. I heard through the grapevine she'd lawyered up, claiming she was just following protocol, but the drone footage was a nail in her coffin. That video, now viewed millions of times on X and YouTube, showed her directing the crew like a general commanding a siege. The public wasn't buying her excuses. But justice wasn't enough to heal the scars on my land. The Grove, once a cathedral of green, was a graveyard of stumps, and every glance at it felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't bring back the 250-year-old oaks, but I could plant new ones. I launched a fundraiser on my YouTube channel calling it Replant the Grove. I expected maybe a few locals to chip in, but the response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from across Texas and beyond. $5 from a college kid, $500 from a retired rancher, even a $1,000 pledge from an anonymous donor who wrote, "For your great-grandpa's legacy." Neighbors showed up with saplings, shovels, and cold beers, turning the replanting into a community event. Kids from the local school helped dig holes, their laughter filling the air where chainsaws had roared days before. Old Man Jenkins, hobbling on his cane, planted a tiny oak and winked. "At me, this one's for you, Caleb. Don't let those suits win." As the saplings took root, I filmed my next YouTube update, standing among the stumps with a seedling in my hand. The camera caught the golden light filtering through the few remaining trees, a reminder of what we'd lost, but also what we were, rebuilding. "This isn't just about my trees," I said, looking straight into the lens. "It's about fighting for what's right, for our history, for our home." The HOA thought they could erase my family's legacy, but they didn't count on us, on you. So, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and let's keep this grove growing. We're not done yet. I planted the seedling, patting the dirt with a promise to my great-grandfather's spirit this land would endure. The lawsuit's still ongoing, and Crestview's fighting dirty, but the community's behind me. Save Caleb's Grove is more than a hashtag, now it's a movement. My ranch, my rules, and no HOA is going to change that. Thanks for watching, y'all. Let's keep the fight alive.